Okay, so the purpose for this video is to help you prepare for the long essay section of the final exam. Now, I'm going to assume that you have gone ahead and read the question. You are familiar with the idea of the American exception. I'm going to go ahead and assume that by now in the semester you have a pretty good understanding of what I mean when it comes to American exceptionalism. So I'm going to leave that part alone. What I want to focus on is the essence of the question when it comes to three things that are directly threatening the concept of America the Great Exception. The first being the growth of government, the federal government getting bigger. The second being the industrialization of the United States. And lastly, chattel slavery. Okay. Now, in doing this, if you are familiar with the study guide, you will know that I've got a laundry list of terms, issues, events, and in some cases people that are listed below the question, and it says something to the effect of it may be helpful to think about these issues and terms when it comes to preparing for the exam. With that being said, it's probably a pretty good idea to take notes on some of the things that I mentioned. And before I go any further, what I want you to understand is I'm giving you one of many different possible ways to answer the exam question and answer it successfully. So by no stretch of the imagination do I expect you to completely replicate some of the suggestions that I make in this video. It's more or less just to get your brain moving in the correct direction when it comes to fully engaging this central question. So let me go ahead and begin with the idea of the growth of government. Okay. Now, recall back at the beginning of the semester when we were talking about the Articles of Confederation and how they were so problematic as far as a central governing system was concerned. Those of you that remember that far back understand that we replaced the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution, which made for a more powerful central government. It gave the federal government the ability to do things like tax the people directly, resolve differences and issues between states, regulate external trade, so on and so forth. Now, I'm hopeful that you can remember why we went ahead and adopted a much more stronger federal system. It was necessary for a number of different reasons, none of which we really have time to go into right now, but it was necessary. The issue becomes, from a very early point, we can see that government is really doing two things. One, it is growing. Its scope is growing, its influence is growing, its visibility, the amount of time that you feel government in your day-to-day American life increases as American history unfolds. Okay. So, case in point number one, the presidency of John Adams. Now, Adams was absolutely a Federalist in the sense that he wanted a stronger central government, felt that it was absolutely paramount to produce a stronger federal government for the survival of the United States. But some of the laws that come out of Washington under his tenure are some of the most destructive harmful laws when it comes to civil rights and civil liberties in American history. The very controversial Sedition Act, for instance, in his presidency, very much threatened the idea of free speech in the United States. Now, the Sedition Act pretty much said that to criticize John Adams, the Congress, the federal government, the military, government generally speaking, would be considered a crime and you could be put in jail for this. So we're only two presidents deep in American history, and already you've got a very vivid example of how the growth of government could threaten the idea of America the Great Exception. Okay? Now, in the same vein, as the 19th century begins to unfold, we're going to see varying opinions, some in the north, some in the south, when it comes to where the line should be drawn with respect to the power of the government, what the government should have a right to do and what it should not have a right to do. You've got people like John C. Calhoun of South Carolina who have an interpretation of the Constitution that it was ratified individually by each and every state in the country, and therefore, if the federal government ever got to a point where it was becoming abusive to the rights and liberties of these individual states, in his case South Carolina, then the state in question could dissolve its affiliation with the United States to protect itself against an abusive centralized federal government. Okay? Now, you've got other individuals like Abraham Lincoln that understand the dangers associated with a big abusive central government, but also understand that if we're going to govern a complex, diverse, and vast country like the United States, um, it's going to have to become all one thing or all another thing. So, whereas John C. Calhoun felt that with respect to slavery in the West, it would be up to the people that lived in places like Kansas, Nebraska, New Mexico, Arizona. Abraham Lincoln was very much in favor of the federal government saying, look, there will be no expansion of slavery in the West, period, end of discussion. We will take no more questions. Okay? So you will continuously see a back and forth discussion with respect to how far federal power should go, how much power is too much power for the federal government to have. Okay. Um, issue number two, that would be the industrialization of the United States. Now, if you recall our conversations involving industrialization, you know that it's not one thing or all another thing. It's a multitude of a lot of different things, okay? And of course, it's got good things and it's got bad things that's associated with it. Good things like the raise of the standard of living in the United States, good things like more opportunities that are being created, uh, good things like now you have groups of people, women for instance, who were not used to earning their own money and having some discretion in their day-to-day life. Now they're earning money and they have a little bit more discretionary ability. Okay, but anytime you have a situation where you've got a small group of people that control the working lives of a great many people, you're going to have a situation that could become destructive to personal rights and personal liberties. Again, a good case in point would be that article that Harriet Martineau wrote on the morals of the manufacturers. Keep in mind that one of the things that the people that own the factories required of the ladies that worked inside those factories, if you had a job at that factory, you could not attend the dancing school. If you did and they found out about it, you'd be fired. And so clearly what we've got here is a case where the people that own the factory were taking away rights, autonomy, freedom, liberty, opportunity of people that are working underneath them. You could make a same case or a similar case for the lunch hour debate in Sam Patch, the famous jumper. You could make a very similar case for the labor activist Seth Luther that's talking about the rise of the aristocracy of capital. That what these business owners are really doing is kind of relegating people of the working class variety to a life of subservience. They would forever have to answer to the people that are owning the factory and the means of production. Okay? So clearly, what industrialization is doing, or one of the many things that it's doing, is it's really concentrating a lot of power in the hands of the people that own the means of production, factories, mills, or otherwise. And this, in turn, has a direct threat posed to the idea of freedom, equality, opportunity in the United States. But the big one would be slavery. Now, slavery threatened the concept of America the Great Exception for very obvious reasons. You've got a very tiny group of people that own enormous amounts of slaves. Okay, So you've got people that are saying that they literally own other human beings. Now that is a really obvious, no-brainer kind of threat to the concept of America the Great Exception. The threat that I want you to think about with respect to slavery has a lot more to do with the threat it poses to people that are already free. So let's take the case of free African Americans, free people of color. We know that as long as there was slavery that was alive and well in the United States, you were always going to live under fear of being taken into slavery, either taken back if you were a runaway slave, or kidnapped and sold into slavery in the case of somebody like Solomon Northrop. Okay, but anyway, laws like the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act continuously reminded the free population that their freedom was only paper thin. And so that's one more way that slavery jeopardized the concept of America the Great Exception. From the perspective of middle class whites and working class whites, what slavery was producing was a situation where every day the rich got richer. Keep in mind, slavery was a rich man's institution. Slaves cost a lot of money, and in order to get into that game, you kind of had to have a pretty advantageous starting point to begin with. Okay, so it was very insulated in the sense that only the rich could really play this game, and furthermore, it wasn't as if you worked really, really hard. If you were a cotton farmer in the South and you did not have slaves, for instance, it's not like if you worked really, really hard on your plantation, you could ever catch up. I mean, clearly the people that owned their workforce were going to cut their overhead costs. If you don't have to pay your workers anything, obviously you're going to have a market advantage when it comes to competition. And lastly, the nature of chattel slavery in the United States meant that you own that person not only for life, you also own any offspring that that slave would produce. And so by the time that you've got the Cotton Revolution of the early 19th century, most of the people, not all, but a good many of them that are going to become very wealthy slave owners, those people are going to have inherited their slaves. Okay, so it's a situation that's very, very threatening to the idea of America the Great Exception, considering one of the principles of that concept is it doesn't matter the station of which you were born. You could be born into humble origins. You could be born into, you could be born with a silver spoon in your mouth, and everybody had the chance to become president of the United States, at least on paper. If slavery was allowed to continue, many, including people like Abraham Lincoln, felt that that idea of rising as high as your talents would take you would eventually become extinct. What you're talking about is a landed aristocracy that's not only inheriting land, but also inheriting their labor force. And for reasons that I've already pointed out, it's making it exceptionally difficult for that labor force to, not labor force, but for other people that don't own slaves to really compete with those other individuals. Now, I'm hopeful that that has generated some ideas with respect to what I expect a good essay to look like in the final exam. If you take this video and you couple it with that laundry list of terms, events, and individuals that appears underneath the central question on the review guide, I really think that you're going to put yourself in a good position to do well on the essay section of the final exam. That's all for right now. Please don't hesitate to email me if you have individual questions. And keep in mind, a really good way of organizing your thoughts with respect to this essay is a simple form of an outline. So I would encourage each and every one of you to draft up a really basic outline to organize your thoughts. It'll make writing this essay infinitely easier when you sit down to do it. Good luck.